The wind off the Claybourne River came in cold and low the morning of the K9 command ceremony, and it carried things with it: exhaust from the parkway, the chemical sweetness of someone's dryer vent, dried leaves scraping across the concrete plaza of the Claybourne County Police Depot. 300 people stood in perfect rows beneath the grey November sky and didn't notice any of it. The 6 Belgian Malinois noticed all of it. They sat in a ruler-straight line at the front of the formation, 45 to 60 pounds each. Coats a rich sable and tan, amber eyes tracking the middle distance with the flat precision of instruments. Their tactical harnesses bore the Claybourne County Police Department's shield. Their handlers stood at parade rest beside them, leashes hanging loose. The dogs didn't need tension. In 14 months of active service, not one of them had required it. At the far end of the velvet rope line, near the maintenance shed post where the crowd had thinned out, a young woman stood alone. Her name was Delia Morrow, and she was 27 years old, and she had taken 2 buses from Knoxville to get here. She wore a grey fleece from the Goodwill bin on Market Street, jeans with a split seam at the left knee, and hiking boots worn smooth on the inside edge of both heels. She carried a canvas tote bag over one shoulder and held in both hands a crumpled printout of the event announcement she had found on a library computer 3 days ago. Public event, open to registered attendees. Officer Ben Whittaker had already asked her twice if she was in the right place. She had shown him the printout both times. He had looked at it, then at her, then at the people on either side of her in their wool coats. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks west," he'd said, the second time. "I'm exactly where I need to be," Delia had told him, quietly, without looking away from the dogs. Whittaker hadn't gone far. He stood 15 feet off, thumb resting on his radio, watching her with the focused uncertainty of a man watching something he couldn't classify. Delia wasn't watching the podium, where Chief Alan Streck was delivering a speech she had rehearsed in her head on the bus. She wasn't watching the mayor or the commissioners or the framed commendations waiting on the ribbon-cutting table. She was watching the dog at the far left end of the line. He was the largest of the 6. He sat with his spine perfectly vertical, nose elevated at a trained angle, amber eyes fixed forward. His official name, according to the department's press release, which Delia had read until the paper softened at the folds, was Cinder. Delia had named him Juniper. She had named him Juniper on a Thursday morning in March of 2022, in the front seat of her 2009 Civic, driving 40 minutes down Route 11W toward the Harlan County Animal Clinic, with one hand on the wheel and the other keeping a cardboard box from sliding off the passenger seat. He had been inside the box, 6 weeks old, severely dehydrated, crying in a thin, continuous sound that had made her talk out loud the entire drive, nonsense reassurances, the kind you say to something you are determined not to let die. He had weighed 4 pounds. He now weighed 61 pounds and was wearing a harness that cost more than her monthly rent. Chief Streck's voice carried from the podium, warm and projected. These animals represent the pinnacle of modern law enforcement capability. They are fearless, precisely trained, bonded to their handlers at a level the civilian mind can barely comprehend. They are simply the best. The audience applauded. The handlers straightened slightly. Delia became aware that she was crying the way you become aware of rain, gradually, then completely. Not sobbing, just tears moving steadily down her face in the cold, and she didn't lift a hand to stop them. She kept her eyes on Juniper. Sergeant Derek Bowen noticed the change in Cinder before he saw it. 14 months of partnership had calibrated him to the dog's body in a way that was almost neurological. He felt the faint shift of weight come through the leash before his eyes registered anything. He glanced down. Cinder's nose had dropped from its trained elevation. His nostrils were working. Rapid, precise pulls, passing whatever the wind had just carried from the eastern side of the plaza. Cinder, Bowen said, low and clipped, eyes front. Cinder didn't move. And then a sound came out of the dog that Sergeant Derek Bowen, in 14 months and 300 hours of joint training, had never once heard. It was not a bark, it was not a growl. It was a high, broken cry, immediate and raw, the sound of something recognizing something it had given up expecting to find. At the other end of the line, the dog named Reef went rigid. Then Gunner stood up. The ceremony coordinator said something urgent into her headset. It didn't matter. Reef began to pull. Officer Tara Novak planted her feet and yanked the leash with both hands, jaw locked, biceps straining. Reef pulled like a machine, paws scraping the pavement, focus locked entirely on the far end of the rope line, then tempo, then blaze, then kestrel. The line dissolved. "Hold your animals!" Streck's voice cracked across the plaza, the polished ceremony tone gone entirely. "I cannot hold him!" Bowen shouted back, heels grinding against the pavement. Cinder made a full-body lunge that yanked the leash clean through Bowen's gloved hands. The clip gave. The dog was loose. The crowd came apart. Folding chairs went over. A woman grabbed her child and ran. Whittaker drew his baton and stepped in front of the rope, radio at his mouth. Loose dog, 6 animals, northeast quadrant. The dogs moved through the panicking crowd the way water moves around stone, without hesitation, without deviation. A running man, a child's scream, a uniformed officer stepping directly into their path with both hands raised, none of it registered. 6 Belgian Malinois in full tactical gear had a single fixed point, and they were going to it. They converged near the maintenance shed post. Whittaker raised his baton and stepped in front of the young woman in the grey fleece. The dogs went around him. They hit Delia Morrow like a wave, and the crowd gasped, and Whittaker spun, certain he was about to see something terrible. He saw something he didn't have language for. Delia was on her knees on the cold pavement. The canvas tote had fallen. The crumpled printout was skidding away in the wind. She was surrounded, 6 large working dogs in tactical harnesses pressing against her, climbing her, nosing into her collar, her hair, the creases of her elbows, and she had both arms wrapped around the neck of the largest one, the one called Cinder, and she was shaking. Cinder was whimpering. His whole body trembled. He pressed his face against her throat and stayed, shaking, and still at once, and the cry coming out of him was broken and constant and completely unlike anything his handler had ever heard. Reef had his head in her lap, crying in high-pitched pulses. Gunner and Kestrel were circling her in tight, frantic loops before throwing themselves down at her knees. Tempo was licking the side of her face with the focused urgency of a dog who had a great deal of time to make up for. Blaze sat 2 feet away and simply looked at her, not the flat tracking gaze of a working dog, but something older, something that had been held in reserve for a long time. The most decorated K9 unit in 4 counties was completely undone. "Juniper," Delia choked into the fur at Cinder's neck. "Juniper, baby, I know, I'm so sorry." The plaza was entirely silent except for the wind and the dogs, and the sound of a young woman crying in the middle of all of them. Bowen reached the rope line, chest heaving. He stood at the edge of the reformed crowd and stared at his dog who growled at anyone who touched him without command, who had backed a 200-pound suspect against chain link without being told, lying with his face pressed into a stranger's collarbone, making a sound that Bowen had only ever heard puppies make. "Cinder," he said. There was nothing behind it, no authority at all. "Heel." Cinder didn't lift his head. Chief Streck pushed through the perimeter. He took in the scene, the young woman on her knees, the 6 dogs, the handlers standing useless at the edges. His face moved through several expressions and settled on none of them. "Who is she?" he said quietly. Nobody answered. Delia looked up through the tears. Her eyes found Bowen's. She didn't look frightened. She looked like someone who had been underwater for 2 years and had just, with great difficulty, broken the surface. "They caught my scent," she said. "I'm sorry for the disruption. I didn't know if it would happen. I just needed to see them." The briefing room inside the depot had no windows and a fluorescent tube that buzzed faintly at a frequency designed to make everyone feel slightly ill. Chief Streck sat on one side of the metal table. Delia sat on the other. Bowen stood at the door. Two dogs, Cinder and Reef, had refused to be kennelled. When handlers had tried to clip leads to their harnesses, both animals had gone rigid and still, lips lifting in a warning that needed no sound. It was not until Delia had pressed her palm flat to each harness and said, quietly, "Go on, it's okay," that they had allowed themselves to be led away. Even then, both had stopped in the hallway and looked back. Streck folded his hands on the table, his rings knocked against the laminate. "The department paid $432,000 for those 6 animals," he said. "They carry EU documentation, Belgian microchips, certified working dog lineage going back 4 generations. Delia reached into the canvas tote and removed a Ziploc bag. Inside was a composition notebook, black and white marble cover, pages swollen with age and handling. She set it on the table. "His name is Juniper," she said, "not Cinder. I named him in March of 2022. He was 6 weeks old and someone left him in a box on the shoulder of Route 11W outside of Bean Station, Tennessee." She pushed the notebook to the center of the table. "Every dog I took in has a page, date of intake, condition on arrival, veterinary records, behavioral notes." She paused. "I kept it because the county made me prove, every time a neighbor complained about the noise, that I was a legitimate operation." Streck didn't touch it yet. "The dog you call Reef," Delia continued, steadier now, with the steadiness of someone who had rehearsed this on 2 buses over 300 miles, "I called Biscuit. He came from an illegal breeding operation outside Morristown. He had a broken toe on his right front paw that hadn't been set. Dr. Louise Farber at the Harlan County Animal Clinic pinned it. She'll still have the file." Bowen was already on his phone. "His intake would have been October 2021, Delia said. "Dr. Farber's number is in the notebook." Bowen stepped out. The door didn't fully close. Streck looked at the young woman across the table. He read what he saw: the chapped knuckles, the practical nails, the quality of exhaustion behind her eyes that wasn't today's exhaustion, but the accumulated kind, the kind that settles in over years. "If these dogs were yours," he said, "how did they end up here with Belgian microchips and import documentation?" Delia's jaw tightened. Something moved through her face. Grief that had been in one place long enough to go solid. "December 2023, she said. "A man came to my property in a black state-issued SUV. He said his name was Deputy Commissioner Glenn Murchison with the State Animal Control Oversight Division. He brought deputies and county trucks. He had paperwork. He said my rescue, Second Chance Hollow, out on a leased property near Harlan, was in violation of state licensing requirements for facilities holding more than 8 animals." Streck's folded hands went very still. "I had 14 dogs," Delia said. "I showed him my permits, the county variants I'd filed. Dr. Farber's health certifications. He said none of it was sufficient. He said the dogs would go to a state holding facility." She stopped, took one breath. "He told me they would almost certainly be euthanized. Dogs with bite histories, and several of mine had histories from before I got them, not from anything at my rescue, were ineligible for adoption under the revised state guidelines." Her voice stayed level. "He looked me in the eye and said that, and then he loaded all 14 of them into the trucks and drove away." The room held it. "I lost the lease on the property 3 months later," she said. "I couldn't pay it. There was nothing left to run." Streck stood. He walked to the far wall and stood there for a moment. When he turned around, something in his face had changed, not collapsed exactly, but reorganized around a different weight. "Glenn Murchison retired from this department 14 months ago," he said, his voice flat. He served as Deputy Commissioner for Procurement and Compliance. He authorized the certification documents for this K9 unit. He paused. He's in Scottsdale now. I know because I signed his retirement card. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room, the way cold air fills a room, completely, and with nowhere to go. Bowen came back through the door. He was pale. He stood for a moment without speaking. Dr. Farber confirmed the pin, he said. She pulled the file while I was on the phone. The angle matches her X-ray exactly. He looked at Delia. She said she remembers Biscuit. Said he used to fall asleep in the waiting room with his nose tucked under his front paws. Delia pressed her lips together hard. Bowen sat down in the chair across from her. "He's my partner," he said. "I know that doesn't touch what happened to you. But Gunner, radar, he dragged me out of a burning vehicle last April. Pursuit ended in a ram. I was disoriented, couldn't get the door. He broke his harness clip getting to me. I still don't know how he worked the latch." Delia looked at him. The vet tech who did his intake said his ears looked like satellite dishes, she said. "That's why I called him Radar. He was 8 months old, and he'd never been inside a building before. He pressed himself against my legs the whole first week, like he was trying to disappear into them." Bowen was quiet. He looked down at the table. "He still screams when I try to clip his nails," he said. "Every single time. Like I'm pulling them out." Delia almost smiled. "Peanut butter on the back of your left hand. Let him lick for 45 seconds before you touch the clippers." Bowen looked up at her. "Okay," he said after a moment. "That's something." Streck had come back to the table. He sat down. He looked at the composition notebook, at the swollen pages, and the careful handwriting. "Ms. Morrow," he said, "you said 14 dogs. We have 6. "I know," she said. "That's the other reason I came." "Where are the others?" "That's what I need you to find." She opened the notebook to a page near the back, a list, handwritten in the careful script of someone who believed it would someday matter. Names, intakes, markings. If Murchison sold 6 to you, he sold the rest somewhere else. Other departments, other units, they won't know. She slid the notebook across. "I need to know they're alive." Streck picked it up. He read it. He set it down. "I want Murchison's procurement records subpoenaed tonight," he said to Bowen. "Every transaction, every transfer, and I want warrants by morning." He looked at Delia. "We will find them," he said. "Everyone." She nodded once. Her hands had stopped trembling. "Take them back to their handlers," she said. Streck paused. "I'm sorry." "The 6, take them back." She pressed her palm flat to the table. "I have a 1-bedroom apartment in East Knoxville. I work 30 hours a week as a vet tech assistant. I don't have a yard. I don't have the lease on the Harlan property. Someone's storing construction equipment in that pasture now." She looked at the table for a moment, then back up. "I came here because for 2 years I believed they were dead. I needed to know they weren't. And looking at them, looking at how healthy they are, how strong." Her voice caught and held. "They're not broken anymore. They have jobs. They have partners. That's everything I ever wanted for them." She lifted her chin slightly. "I can't take that away from them because I miss them." Bowen looked at the surface of the table for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "That costs something. I want you to know I understand that." Delia nodded. Her throat worked. Streck straightened in his chair, not the performance of authority now, just the genuine weight of one. "Claybourne County has a standing civilian consultancy position for K9 behavioral development," he said. "Vacant 8 months, 68,000 a year, full benefits, 3 days a week on site, working with the unit on behavioral conditioning and stress response." He held her gaze. "Before you tell me you don't have a degree, you took 6 dogs that someone else threw away and turned them into the finest working unit in this region. You did that with a notebook and a leased field in Harlan County. I'm not interested in your transcript." Delia looked at him for a long time, then at Bowen. Bowen had his hands folded and was watching her with the expression of a man who has just understood the full shape of something. "The peanut butter thing alone," he said, "that's worth showing up." She laughed, startled out of her, real and unguarded, and it broke across her face the way a window breaks when the pressure behind it finally goes. "Okay," she said, and then again steadier, "okay." Deputy Commissioner Glenn Murchison was arrested at his home in Scottsdale 7 weeks later on 6 counts of grand larceny, 3 counts of fraud against the state, 1 count of criminal impersonation of a government officer, and 14 counts of theft of personal property. The total fraud across 2 county procurements exceeded $400,000. He did not comment to the press. The subpoena of his records located the remaining 8 dogs within 3 weeks. 4 had been sold to the Haskell County Sheriff's K9 unit, 2 to a private security contractor in Nashville, 2 to the Bryan County Police Department in Western Tennessee. All 8 were confirmed healthy, working, and under the care of handlers who, when contacted by Chief Streck's office and told the full story, responded, every one of them with a long silence before they could answer. Those 8 handlers drove their dogs to Claybourne on a Saturday morning in February. It was not an official event. There were no dress uniforms, no velvet ropes, no podiums. Delia arrived in the grey fleece with the canvas tote over her shoulder and walked out to the training field as all 14 dogs were brought through the gate together for the first time in 2 years. What happened next was not tactical. It was total. It was the loudest and least disciplined thing any of the officers present had ever witnessed in uniform, and not one of them would have traded it. Sergeant Bowen stood at the fence with his coffee going cold in his hand, watching gunner barrel into Delia from 10 yards out and knock her flat on her back in the February grass and then stand with both paws on her chest, licking her face with the single-minded focus of a dog who has been waiting and intends to make that known. Bowen shook his head. He was smiling. $400,000, he said, to no one in particular. And she built them with cardboard boxes and peanut butter. On the field, surrounded by 14 dogs and everything they had survived, Delia Morrow lay on her back in the cold February grass and laughed until she couldn't breathe. And for the first time in 2 years, she had nowhere else she needed to be, and no reason to be anything other than exactly where she was.